this is going to be a humble brag at one of the presidential, not that I do a lot of those. At one of the presidential balls, they had Vivek sitting across from me. I looked over, I was like, man, you must be on the way down because they're sitting next to me.
A business partnership is a marriage. It's not so easy to get rid of. And I think there's instinct sometimes to say, well, fuck it. If this works out, it'll be fine. But the irony is when stuff goes really well, then
that's even harder.
Then it's even harder.
If you take anything from this podcast today,
pick your partners well.
Pick your partners well. Okay, guys. Business Untitled. We are back. I know we've been spotty, but a lot's been going on. But we're back to keep you guys informed and to just shoot the shit with my two best friends. With our star, Mike Novogratz, and his co-stars, Dave Barry and Mel Carter. Mike, you was at the inauguration. How was that?
You know,
and why didn't you invite your co-stars?
A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It was funny. One of the nights, this is going to be a humble brag at one of the presidential, not that I do a lot of those. At one of the presidential balls, they had Vivek sitting across from me, Vivek Ramaswamy, right, and his wife, who's wonderful, beautiful wife, very nice. And I looked over, I was like, man, you must be on the way down because they're sitting next to me.
That's a good one.
Listen, I would tell you, the DC had an amazing energy. There was a crypto ball the first night, and I thought, oh, this is going to be a friggin' crypto party. And it had great energy, 1,500 people there. I saw the full cabinet almost showed up, you know, the Washington elite, and crypto was center stage. And bankers were walking around saying, why isn't there a banker ball? Like, why in God's name is crypto having its own ball in the middle of the inauguration, which was the place to be that night. Each night there's like, what's the right party to be at? And that was the place to be. Fun. Snoop Dogg was there. I was trying to get backstage to do a little Business Untitled reunion with Snoop, but a little security.
Yeah, have clearance.
But the mood was good? The mood was
great.
Yeah.
The mood was great. Crypto felt like, how in God's name did we get here? 4 years ago, we were pariahs, and now we're having a ball at the inauguration. Even more importantly, the next night, I went to the vice president's ball, which is this beautiful, elegant 300-person, and you're walking into David Rubenstein and Steve Schwarzman, like the titans of finance. Zuckerberg was there, Peter Thiel, all the tech guys. There had to be 20 crypto CEOs at every table.
And better news for crypto, like everyone is conforming to crypto being a serious thing. I don't know if it's the first bank, but Bank of America just came out and said.
Listen, the day 2 of the presidency, he came out with executive orders. And one thing he said when he was on stage at that ball, he said, I made a lot of promises. I'm a man who keeps my promises. And from bailing out the, Ross from the Silk Road, check, done. Like right through the line of the promises he made in Nashville, he's kept. And so,
which most presidents haven't done that.
And so you're sitting here thinking, wait a minute, we got the repeal of SAB 121, which is a stupid accounting rule. We've got making crypto a strategic, important industry. Banks being able to get involved. Having a crypto council. The shift is 180 degrees. Like he gave us everything we asked for. Yeah. So you can't be upset with him.
What's your thoughts on the immigration rollout that is happening? Another thing he started doing on day one.
Well, listen, I think, again, he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And so let's hope it's done, fairly. But it's going to be very difficult for, my daughter used to teach in back of the yards in Chicago. All her kids were undocumented, right? It's a public school system in the worst neighborhood of Chicago. And she was like, I can only imagine the fear those kids are living in right now. And, so it's, every action has the other side to it. If you're an undocumented immigrant in America, you're scared shitless right now.
Yeah, I think it's a ridiculous plan to deport millions of people, right? I mean, it's one thing if you're talking about
Yeah, I
criminal,
completely agree.
people with
And I'm
criminal
immigrant.
records, and I understand the other side of it, which is you can't just constantly amnesty every 3 months anybody that's snuck in because it's going to incentivize that, right? But on the other hand, the scale of what he's talking about, which I don't think is even remotely realistic in the scheme of things, right? I don't think can be accomplished. I think the minute we're sitting in a restaurant and a bunch of INS agents come in and start dragging people out, right? People are going to freak out, right? And so I think it's still like, it's a promise, it's, yada, yada, yada. But it's a lot of his stuff, a lot of his stuff is for effect at times, right? And so he's making a big statement like, this border needs to be closed and we need to have legal processes around immigration. Very few people disagree with that statement, right? You can't just have, and we've seen it play out in the cities. We've seen the, Democratic mayors in some cities also come through where they've been very vocal about it. And so I think he's making a bigger point, right? He's always been on this. And I think he's using it to basically drive that home. At the end of the day, probably they deport 5% of, or less of the amount of people they're talking about, close the border, and, and then we'll talk about what the ramifications of that are.
I had a great conversation 2 days ago. I was down in Miami with General McMaster, who was in the Trump's first administration, the head of the NSC. Brilliant, thoughtful, but knew how to, he was with Trump for 18 months or 15 months, knew how Trump acted. And we were talking about the changes they're going to make in the military. And he said, most military officers, right, didn't want the thing to go as far. I hate to use the word woke, but woke. But military guys take their commands from the civilians above, and so they were doing what they were told to do. And so this idea that this was a bad general or not a bad general, he's like, these are all pretty tough guys. What he worried about is, and we're seeing in this whole country right now, the reaction's going, because Democrats did a lot of stupid things, worried about a lot of dumb things, focused on this instead of common sense. The pendulum's going really far, and it might go really far the other way, which is not great. And that's what he worried about in the military, that, you push it all the other way, and then you start looking like you got a politicized army, which is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And you can see that in so many things,
Yeah.
DEI had gone too far, but maybe no DEI is also too far.
Right.
Or trans people don't exist, right? One of Dave and my son's best friends is trans. He doesn't exist. No, we know him. He's right there, And so, again, what you're hoping is people focus on the good stuff that's going to happen and actually and hold to account the push so far the other direction. Yeah. But we're going to have a little bit of an overcorrection.
Yeah, there's also like knock-on effects of, like, let's take immigration for a second, right? Okay, we talked about the policy, but there's workforce, right? So if Trump is going to talk about creation of housing, which first day he put some other executive order to Fannie Mae and HUD and stuff about creating more housing, and really blame the expensiveness of housing on regulations, right? Regulatory environment. And there's definitely truth to that. Like, there's overregulation and it's crazy in many of these markets, and that affects the cost of housing. But labor is another input in housing, right? So if you're taking, just to be, for example, millions of recent immigrants, undocumented immigrants, aliens, whatever you want to call them, many of those people are working on farms, they're working on construction sites, they're carpenters, they're roofers. So, when you talk about fixing the price of housing, you have to look at the labor inputs, right? You have to look at inflation, right? You take less people, there's going to be inflation of wages for those who remain, right? Inflation of materials. So there's a lot of complexities to what he's doing. You want to solve housing, kicking out 15 million immigrants isn't going to help you do that, basically.
And it's quite frankly why on tariffs he's already like, well, okay, we're going to go slower than, like, a lot of the early bluster. When push comes to shove, it's now, okay, we're going to go a little slower and just try to see, because you don't want the markets to fall apart. And, so some of this is negotiating tactics. Tariffs is going to be fascinating because they do believe in DC, in this administration, that you'll be able to get a lot of tax revenue from tariffs, and hence be able to keep income taxes low, right? They're not going to raise our taxes. So the Trump tax cuts of, 8 years ago are supposed to expire, and they're not going to let them expire. So, good for people who have the tax cuts. But we have a 7.5% budget deficit. So you got to make that up somehow. And they're hoping to make it up through tariffs and through growth. And so there are going to be a tremendous amount of pro-growth policies knocked out.
I mean, the wrinkle with tariffs and doing that, of course, is like the inflation argument, right? So you start putting tariffs on, charging, sticking them onto all the imports, and we basically run off imports. So then you got inflation. Now you can't bring interest rates down. So it's a tricky balance still. It was a tricky balance before. It's a tricky balance now.
It probably the biggest geopolitical shift in the first 10 days is Trump had really, good meetings with Xi on the phone. They're like a little bromance started. We'll see. And, dollar China is lower. Listen, if the U.S. and China even marginally start getting along a little bit, and, of course, this is negotiating, but there certainly was apparently good chemistry, and the words have been better. Chinese stocks have been bombed out. They become interesting. At the same time, I was talking about this DeepSeek that came out on Friday, Chinese internet at 1/100th.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
It's the young Chinese guys that had run a quantitative trading business, like what we have Renaissance here with Jim Simons. They built a Chinese version of that using AI, and apparently have created an AI which they just made open source, which means anyone can use it for free. That is as good as Sam Altman's AI, right? ChatGPT at 1/100th the hardware input price.
Wow.
And so it was a big story Friday. It wouldn't surprise me if by Monday it starts a tech sell-off, right? And there's a lot of is it real? Are they lying about their inputs? The product is real. Like, no one's lying about the product. You can test it. But how much it's costing, is it real? So there were, if that's true, big implications. But it probably means China tech takes off again. Like, it's so bombed down. And so big market, we'll see. I just say,
what does that mean for us?
I want to say, watch this story.
I want to take the others, yeah.
Watch this story. If NVIDIA, it would be bad for NVIDIA because you're not going to need as many chips or someone else's chips. And data centers, it would be, if you don't need that much for data centers. Because up until then, it was the exact opposite. Everybody, $500 million on this big, consortium to build data centers. $500 billion, right? Between SoftBank and Oracle, and so that was like the fly that showed up and bit people on Friday.
So what are they using to build it?
Different.
It's the story of the week.
Logic thinking.
It's also the story of the week. AI is a story that's going to go on for 10 years. There's zero chance that power consumption is not going to continue to go through the roof with these data processing centers. Right?
I agree.
I mean, like, in a sense, Moore's law was always increasing data processing, every 18 months, doubling it every 18 months. So I'm saying, like, I just think this is like recency bias stuff. Okay, it just came out.
I'm telling you, if it's real, it's Titan. I mean, Mark Andreessen wrote this. This is the biggest thing that's happened in a long time.
You know what? 3 weeks ago, Willow launched, and everybody wrote and freaked out and said, this is the biggest thing that's happening in a long time. Okay, they're all big things. There's a lot of stuff going on. And there's a race around the world for AI. I would say, like, relative to the comment about Xi and Trump, by the way, it's because China's doing horribly, and he's got very little leverage right now, right? Xi has very little leverage. China has much more leverage because he can't figure out how to get his economy out of a tailspin with real estate collapsing, money wanting to flee the country, the Chinese currency overvalued effectively. And so Trump comes in, I think, in a very good position, whereas Xi, he's quite a bit humbled right now because he's got to figure out how to get more goods into the U.S. and minimize tariffs is part of that story.
Wait, just to touch on something before I forget. We were having a conversation the other day at Mike's kitchen, and somehow AI came up. And you said AI doesn't really exist yet. It's more coding and so on and so forth. For me, I was like, what are you talking about? And I want you to kind of explain that. When you said AI, or what did you say exactly?
Well, so what AI is like, it's a big word, and there's a lot in there, right? What I'm not an expert, but like what we're seeing now is this like large language processing model, right? That the thing that's happened recently is like all of a sudden it can just understand just like colloquial normal language, and respond to that and source data off the web. What I was saying about that is like the actual like thinking like independently of AI is still in its infancy by far. Like what it's doing right now is taking instructions, taking a protocol or an algorithm, and executing it at like quantum speed, effectively, right? But I'm saying like it's still not like thinking for itself.
Yeah,
It's,
no,
it's
I
a
agree
little
with
bit
you because I
different,
did some
It's like-
research on it after, right?
yeah,
And AI is kind of like,
But that idea of the singularity or computers that start thinking of themselves, people now think we could be 6 months away. I mean, we're like a year away. Like it is so much closer than we ever thought.
yeah, but here's the thing, right? And it brings back
Yeah.
like Elon's point, right? Like when that
dangerous.
actually exists,
yeah.
how do you control that? Because it's like you're creating something that controls itself in a
Right.
weird way.
That's
Yeah, that's the
we are
whole
much
thing.
closer to that debate than we thought we were. Is what I'm reading, hearing, talking to people, and listen. It was really also interesting at the. You look at the inauguration, right, where everyone's seat is actually very scripted. The tech.
And you were 17 rows to the back.
Table 50. The tech titans, the richest men in the world, were sitting in front of the cabinet.
Crazy.
In front of
I
the
saw it.
It was noticed by every news commentator, every Democrat certainly, but it feels like an oligarchy, right? Now, the good thing is we need tech people in our government. Like it's America's edge, right? We need to stay ahead. We need technology in our government, to make it more efficient. We need to stay the leader in tech. But it was, 200 billion, 200 billion, 400 billion. Like there was $1 trillion of wealth on the stage. We've never seen that in America. So it's interesting to watch.
And I want to say something else about the AI. It was your question, right? Is like it's taking right now, like it's taking its data from like Twitter and social media and things like that, and so it's subject. As these algorithms move at light speed and we don't even understand them anymore, it's subject to the same biases, the same imperfections, the same, conspiracy theories, just on like hyperdrive, right? So, like, AI is like a catch-all term at this point in time. I think the tech guys, by the way, like Andreessen being number one in this category, and I've been to things like Singularity University in San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
And observed them. And the problem with them is they just think tech equals good. Andreessen thinks just tech equals good, it will solve itself. I would posit, like, when you look at things like Facebook and Instagram, okay, and we had this discussion, but that algorithm is set for what? User engagement. That is what makes them money, right? And so at the end of the day, you put more power behind these algorithms that are just trying to work your brain chemicals to get you to sit on that screen, you're gonna it's like rats on cocaine. You're gonna prioritize scrolling over sleep, over food, over sex, over anything, right? I mean, it's already almost at that level, but this is putting like an inordinate amount of computing power behind that too, where it's gonna know every time you breathe, every time you move, every time you show up anywhere, that data is collected somewhere. And so like the concept of like in the past where some, Soviet Union totalitarian place had to have like 1,000 million people analyzing, papers basically to see what Mel was doing. Very imperfect. A lot of places to hide, right? A lot of places where there were privacy. I think what's going on is like privacy is literally being eliminated, period, by AI. There will be no such thing as privacy. It'll start to go into pre-crimes, right? Go watch Minority Report if you want.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And things like that. And that's what's scary about it because there's so much biases in this phone and algorithm already. What do you think is going to change that? What gives you any shred of hope after seeing all the technology that we've brought to the earth today that is so biased that we talk about all the time about facial recognition, like throwing black people into custody wrongly all the time, right? Because the bias is how that computer program is created by a bunch of white people that are sourcing 60,000 white faces and 10,000 black faces into the, it can't distinguish. Like all these things get like completely frightening on AI and it has to be regulated.
It's crazy. Perplexity is the only one I actually use. I want to learn Chat GPT because I heard it's so different. And
Perplexity runs on top of ChatGPT.
Yeah, I know that. But I'm just saying, whatever. And Perplexity, I literally, anyone that knows me, I like use it. Not since you told me about it. There was one time Perplexity really let me down. And it happened like
it's wrong
four
all the
different.
time.
It's wrong all the
It's
time.
all wrong all the time.
Let me tell you, we were joking with my friends at your house in the Hamptons, and it was like, how much is such and such worth? How much is Mel Carter worth? And Perplexity said, Mel Carter, businessman, all the facts about me is worth $750 million.
Yes! No! You did
And
it!
I was like,
You did it!
what the fuck? This thing could be wrong about everything. Because it was like...
You know, it's
can be
garbage
wrong.
in, garbage out. And so you got it like, and what's interesting is,
And we did it like 4 different times.
Well,
and it
It's
was
wrong
like...
all the time. It's wrong all the time. And
but it's also, when you learn how to use it, it's unbelievably powerful.
it is helpful.
No, but it
it's
is very,
helpful
very,
if you
very,
ask it-
very. Most of the things is right. I'm just saying sometimes, once in a blue, like it was so wrong that it was like it made me question so many things that
Well,
came before.
It's also one thing to ask it a specific question and source answers, or say, "Hey, frame this for me so I can think through this." You know, but like when you start to treat it as an oracle, and you're just like, you know,
That's a really good point.
Because it becomes no different than that. You just like give your mind over to this thing, and then you think like whatever Perplexity says. And look, more information does not equal more truth, right? That's how conspiracy theories are formed, right? And so like what I worry about with the Perplexity thing is it's just the next iteration of, you know, Google or Google Maps, but in a place where you're asking a specific question, and there's a high level of assumption that this thing's an oracle and knows what it's doing. And
Well, what it's good at is, like, I could take a new book, dump the book into Perplexity and say, give me a quick synopsis recap. And it's a pretty damn good synopsis
it's a good tool.
recap. And so now, where you're better off reading the book, but you had 5 hours to read a book versus, 5 minutes to get the recap.
Yeah.
Now, it might just numb us all, instead of reading books, we'll just read recaps. But
It will do that. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, if you think through, like, once upon a time, people knew how to get around by the North Star or the sun, like north and south, right? Even when we were young, like, you'd go memorize directions. You'd have to drive somewhere. You'd be like, okay, I'm going to do this. Right now, you just check your brain into Google Maps. You drive off a cliff, and that thing told you to drive off a cliff, right? Like you just completely outsource your brain, and Google Maps becomes the oracle of maps. So you no longer have any say or agency in that decision. So if you keep extending that and you go into Perplexity, that's the danger with Perplexity, is that, and who's controlling it, what data is it sourcing, and where's critical thinking come into this whole thing?
So let's switch for a second about the thing that we're all here for, business. So 2024 has been like, I'm gonna get into it because I love to share with my audience, but not yet, but I'll get into some parts of it. One of the worst years I've had in a long time. Very great things happen as well. I had some super friends that helped save me in a lot of different ways. I was able to grind through it. You know, Dave pointed out to me one time, which made me feel really good because I didn't know anyone noticed. Mike didn't notice. Maybe he did. But Dave was like, I just watch you. I was working on something. He was like, I watch you just not give up, like figure. And then collectively, we all solved it with the help of Connor and Ben and so on and so forth. But fast forward, Friday this week, I'm dealing with like another big problem, work problem, and just like, oh my. And I remember being at my window because for whatever reason, when I get really stressed and I'm like trying to solve things, I stay out the window and I'm like on the phone. And I just started laughing to myself, and I was like, fuck, why am I here every 3 months? Just like every 3 months, I'm like on the edge. And I'm like, it was so crazy because like looking from the outside, right? Everyone wants the success, but I'm like, does everyone want this journey? Like, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, they don't really know enough what the journey is of being a owner, of being a CEO, of like, I spoke to my friend, Sonny Gill, shout out to Sonny Gill, and he was like, he's an owner of a lot of businesses as well. And he was like, me and my CEO, which his CEO works for him, he was like, we laugh and we're like, people don't know being an owner and being a CEO, 70% of your day is shit.
Yeah.
And like,
Mel, well, I got a small violin for you.
and I think we don't talk about that enough, right? Like, and I wanted to ask you, do you feel that way? Ask you specifically, I want to ask, because I know 70% of his day is shit, but he celebrates the 30%. But I don't know. Is 70, you seem to have it figured out a lot more than him and I. Like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I want
smoke mirrors.
I want to talk about that. Like, I want to talk about, do you feel that way?
Well, listen, when I would say it always feels shitty when you're in a hole. And then you're like, oh my God, I'm in this hole.
But do you feel like you're in a hole every 3 months?
I don't. And I don't feel like 70% of my day is shit. There are times when I'm like, oh, this sucks, right?
Yeah.
There are plenty of times like that. But broadly, I enjoy what I do. I enjoy the people I work with. It's stressful, right? If you try to do something really big, it's going to be stressful.
Yeah.
But you're making that decision. I tell you what really sucks is living in California and have your home burned up. I tell you what really sucks is finding out your wife just got cancer, and so it's interesting to me because even I'm going through my own shit at times.
No, but we're just talking about.
I know,
and
I know.
hear you, but we're just talking about from like a work perspective.
But remember, you're choosing to be an entrepreneur. You're choosing, and you got to go eyes wide open. You know, it's not a 40-hour-a-week job.
No, but
right?
that's what I want to try to point out for the entrepreneurs that watch us and may only see the success.
It is not a 40-hour-a-week job. It is a 70-hour-a-week job. And 70 hours a week is 7 days a week, 10 hours a day.
How much of those hours you deal with solving stressful problems? We're only what sucks 100% is find out your house just lost. Like those are problems where we know.
But again,
it's just from a business aspect.
The trick
and being a CEO or owner.
The trick, and what you see Dave do very well in this, is just because you're dealing with a problem doesn't mean it has to be stressful, right? It's an objective reality. This person, stole from the company. That's no fair. I got, no fun. I got to deal with it. Or this person's grandmother got sick and he can't come into work, and I need someone to, manage the front desk. So if you just deal with the objective reality, like I got something shitty happened, I got to deal with it. That shouldn't. It's not fun, but it doesn't mean it doesn't create the emotional stress. The emotional stress comes from when who you think you are is put at risk, right? That's where the emotional stress comes from. Normal dealing with problems, it's just a headache. But the real stress that gets into your body and is when you think, oh my God, I built Irby and I got interest rates wrong. And if they don't come back soon, I'm going to have to frickin', borrow more money. I'm only going to own 10% of it instead of 30% of it. Like, and what are people going to think about me?
Which he's just hypothetically speaking, by the way.
Saying, it's things that put who you think you are at risk. That's where the stress comes from.
I'm going to move to you. So I'm asking you, you made great points, but we're just talking about business. How much of your week goes to dealing with the employee that couldn't make it in, that had to do something, just from a bit? Because what we want to teach entrepreneurs or business owners or whatever, because I think a lot of people look at all of us and just see the success and don't understand that I'm at the phone fucking losing my mind because there's another problem and another problem that I created essentially, right? But I chose that because I want to be a business owner, and that comes with being a business owner. So like, I guess the question is like, do you agree with that? And what advice would you give?
There's very different birthing a business. Right? I got a friend who's doing a startup. Everything feels like it's life or death because it kind of is life or death when you're birthing a business. If you don't get the customers to the ice cream shop, remember we had Jenny. I got the ice cream shop. If no one's coming in, I'm going to run out of money. Like that, it does feel like life or death because it is, versus running a business that is already established is different. It's a different kind of pressure and a different kind of stress.
But most people who own a business, right, unless you inherited it, 90% of people who start a business, they have to go through that. Unless you just
I was talking
right
to Will
Ahmed,
from Whoop, who's going to be out, this weekend. And when you're building a big business, all our entrepreneurs said it. It's a grind, it's stress, but if you make it unfun, like they like it.
I like it too, and we all like
But you're
it.
complaining about it.
No, I'm
No,
not
he's not
complaining
complaining
about it.
I would
I'm
say-
trying to talk
yeah.
about the reality of it, and I'm
Yeah.
asking you. Like I love my life. I can't even believe I'm here half the time, but it doesn't turn off that I had a incredibly stressful year and still solving it. I was just having a moment, and I think that was the moment I realized, like, look, you can't kill yourself. And I laughed to myself, and I was like, fuck, I'm here every 3 months, and I'm just wondering.
But you had what I would call existential crises, right? Your business, like, how do I fix this before I lose my business or losing an artist?
Yeah.
Or,
Right.
like, that's different than the headaches of every day running a business.
Yeah, but I'm saying there's always a headache, and that's
But a headache's different than a crisis.
So all right, let me recap.
Okay.
So I think that to start, we find like entrepreneurs or people that are founding businesses, you come out of a place of passion. Like you have to believe in something, right?
Yeah.
So believing in something, like, so that's where it starts for me is like, it's like flow state, you know, at times. So, and real estate actually translates to this pretty well, even because each project's a bit of a new project, right? So it's not like having an ice cream factory, right? You can still find places that inspire you and grow and you want to do, it might be new flavors or, right? But in real estate, there's something about like creation and, you know, kind of passion. And so for me, it starts with like that idea, that passion, that has to be anchored to like, I want to do this thing in the world for a reason, right? It's not anchored to like, money's always a part of it, but like, I feel like if it starts with like the passion, then that is like fulfilling in a different kind of way, you know? And so a lot of like, when I look back on business or I think to myself like that question, like my memory says like, it's been great, you know,
Yeah.
notwithstanding that certain days have their challenges and certain weeks and months even have their challenges. But my overall recap of it is like, it's exciting. You know, you get to be a mover and a shaker. You basically get to like take your ideas and like put them into practice in the world. Right. And
Yeah.
that's really cool. And I think there's something, you know, there was a book written, Flow or whatever, once upon a time,
Yeah.
right? By that guy.
Everyone's talking
And,
about flow.
you know, and so flow state is like the act of just being really engaged in something creative, you know, whatever that is, right? And I think that's a really cool fundamental part about being an entrepreneur, being a business person. Number one.
Yeah.
Okay. To Mike's point, there's risk is risk, right? So we're always all going to take risk in that context. And that kind of risk is different when you're an employee somewhere, right? If you're just like ex-employee and you get a salary and your bonus is fixed, let's just take, you're not really in a risk position in the way I'm using risk, right?
Yeah.
But like when we do this, there's risk as part of that because you're, you know, you want to own this concept or, you know, kind of be in control of it. And so then risk, if you're not managing it correctly, or even if you are, there's always going to be stressful times, right? Within that, that's where I think things can get like internally, existentially stressful. And I do agree with something Mike said right there, which is that a lot of time your ego is in that, and you have to like be aware of like, what is this me feeling a way about something versus the reality of how you might survive it. So if one of us is having a problem, a crisis, you know, something that's giving us stress, it's important to separate like, okay, let's say there's something and I missed it and it's going to cost me X dollars, $1 million, whatever it might be, right? Part of that might be a reality of just being able to step back, and why maybe, you know, you said like, I handled this well is I try really hard to like detach my ego from that. Like there's an instinct you can be like, well, what are people going to think of me? I'm going to be a failure. I said I was going to do this. This is not what's happened, right? And that's that thing that can cause a lot of like anxiety and things like that. So if you can kind of take yourself out of that and say, nobody cares that much, it's going to be okay, right? And like live to fight the next day. That's how I try to think of it. So
one of my old bosses once said, I know when you have a great day, you're walking around thinking, everyone's noticing that guy.
Yeah.
They really aren't. And you say, I know when you're having a shitty day, you're like, oh my God, they're all looking at you. No, they really aren't. Like, you think that. And not many people. People are busy with their own lives.
Yeah.
And so, but it does. We all put that pressure on ourselves. Oh my
Yeah.
God, what are they going to think?
Yeah,
But I want to say,
there's another. I was
Go
going to say
ahead.
one other thing. He was saying things that people once said, but in a crisis once, where I was really feeling this, and I say this a lot, and I've never forgot this lesson. Right? It was something many years ago that was really stressful, right? In my business life, and a guy that I really respected, not going to say, but said, 10% of the people in this world are going to love you no matter what, and 10% are going to hate you no matter what, be jealous, hate, whatever. And the other 80%, they're going to look for your reaction and how you're handling this thing, and they're going to shape their world accordingly.
Yeah.
And like, that's a piece of that too, right? So when things are going, so that sticks with me. So if things are going like choppy, you still need to show up and have this, like, it's going to be all right. You need to project, and that can be, it takes energy to do that.
Yeah, you got to
right?
project confidence.
You got to project confidence into that, and you have to like find that reserve of energy.
And there's a fine line between, so my grandmother used to say, don't let them, show out there with the smile, like my Irish grandmother. Even if things are going poorly, dress nicely, show up with a big smile. There's a fine line between projecting strength and being authentic, right? You can show up projecting strength, say, we got some shit we're going to deal with it, but your body language still has to be positive. And that's hard. That's where you've got to detach the problem from who you think you are. And it's listen, if it was easy, we'd all do it. Everyone struggles with it at some degree. The reality is, for the smartest people, they still make mistakes, right? I mean, you think about, let's say the three of us got together and we put all our money in and we built this amazing restaurant, and we opened it in the first week, it was popping, and we're like, this is going to be a success. And then COVID happens. And we're like, we're so screwed. And we'd have been screwed. We'd have lost all our money and, trying to get some government handouts, and it would have been no one's fault. It would have felt horrible, unfair. And so reality is, like, shit happens. And it's how you deal with the shit that happens is what defines you.
Completely agreed. I do want to say on the other side of that, while I was thinking about that, and Sonny said the 70% thing, what he didn't say was what I thought about. And I was like, man, if 70% is shit, I could agree with that this year, but that 30% is so amazing. That is so worth starting your own business and doing everything you can in your power to make it work, and the fight and the struggle. And because it's like, like I said, sometimes I can't believe I'm here. I've been to 30-something countries, right? I still, remember when Mike told me, your life isn't much different from mine. He says that to me all the time. In all reality, it is. But I know what he means, right? Like, I get to travel everywhere. I get to, so the work that I put in, stressful, but, coming from where I come from twice, Trinidad and Flatbush, like, I think these decisions that ultimately led to me sitting here was worth every ounce of stress, because I got to take care of my family. I still take care of my family. I got to travel. I get to, that 30% feels like 100 when it happens.
What's the one thing you would have, if you knew, like, what's the one thing you learned, like, if you had known it then, like, you would have changed?
Then
what's a
when?
lesson you learned? I don't know, whatever, a bunch of years ago, like, you said you've had some stress, and you, like.
What would you have done differently?
What would you have done differently?
Listen to Dave about one particular fucking person. And fuck that person, by the way.
Listen, there are lessons in that, right? We often make decisions. I know what you're talking about. We make decisions because you're just so excited to do something, and you have a flashing red light, and you're like, I'm not going to look at that flashing red light, even if it's a friend who you trust. I don't want to pay. Don't hear him.
Yeah.
When you should, because you're so excited to get a deal done.
No, I think to cap, you know what I think I would take as a lesson of that, though, really, if I was in this audience is, you have to be really careful about who your partners are. And I've had the benefit. That is
such, please say that again.
Yeah, you have to be really careful about who your partners are. And I've had the benefit of being in many, many partnerships, hundreds probably, because real estate works in this way where many different deals have different partner configurations. And I've been in a lot of other little businesses. And it is just so important to pick your partners correctly, because great partners are great, good partners, even average partners. But when you have a bad partner, it saps so much energy and so much of what you've done. So it's a really good lesson.
Please, if you take anything from this podcast today,
Pick your partners
pick
well.
your partners well.
Shout out
And
to Chris Ferraro, who is my
I have some really,
partner at
really,
Galaxy.
really good partners. I have you as a partner.
Yeah.
I have Mike as a partner. I have Ben Black as a partner. I have Steve. I have really good partners as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things someone pointed out to me. I was like, oh, sometimes I just trust the wrong people. And he was like, no, honestly, you made 90% the right choices, 10% wrong. And I was like, you know what? He's right. But I probably picked 3 wrong partners in my life.
Mhm.
And that
It's everything.
is everything.
It's everything, right?
So please pick
Yeah.
your partners
and
right.
in terms of that, it's not only picking your partners right, because you can't know with total certainty, right? But it's really like thinking through that. It's like a marriage, right? A
Yeah.
business partnership is a marriage. It's not so easy to get rid of.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like picking somebody up. It's not a date. This is like a marriage when you sign documents and get into a business together. And I think there's instinct sometimes to say, well, fuck it. If this works out, it'll be fine. But the irony is when stuff goes really well, then
That's even harder.
then it's even harder, because
I did all the
people
work.
start-
You did nothing.
yeah, people start worrying about the money, and things like that. So you have to have that in your mind, like as you're negotiating that, thinking through like, okay, if this thing really does become my dream business, is this person the person that's going to do the amount of work percentage wise that they're represented in this deal, right? Or the money, and thinking through that stuff.
And you know what? I'll just throw this out there. One of my businesses, I picked the wrong partner. That partner helped that business go like this. Down.
Yeah.
We got rid of that partner. All the other partners came in, and that business is now And guess what?
Yeah.
That partner who brought the business down still is entitled to something from the business. And you're like,
I always
oof.
talk about? Bill Gates started Microsoft with Paul Allen.
Perfect example.
And Paul Allen, I believe, got ill
Yeah, he did.
and left Microsoft and owned a giant stake. So he didn't work there. Bill Gates built it into one of the most fantastic, famous businesses of all time. Spectacular, colossal. And Paul Allen became one of the richest men in the world. I have never once heard Bill Gates complain about it, say, oh, that's no fair.
Yeah.
Like, he made a deal. He lived by his deal.
Yeah.
And he was, I'm sure, happy that Paul Allen did well.
Yeah.
Publicly.
But Paul Allen was a good partner.
Yeah.
He didn't have as much value as Gates, obviously, but he was a good partner.
But he left. I mean,
Yeah.
he left very early in the
No,
cycle.
he did.
Microsoft.
Because of health, though.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. But again, later on in life, when you're worth 100 million and this guy's worth 30, and you've done 98% of the work,
Yeah.
it would have been okay if Bill Gates complained once. He never did. At least that I ever heard.
You know what? Yeah, but there's that ego thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, it worked out. Yeah.
But
in a sense.
that's different, though.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Well,
If
it's
you
because
have
he
a
got sick.
partner that got ill, that was a good
Yeah.
But then he got
guy.
healthy again. Then he was healthy. He lived a long and productive life.
But the company was Bill Gates already did what he did.
No,
Well, listen, I think
it's a lot of
I'm
work.
just
to
saying
build a
that's
company.
completely different from somebody being a scumbag. If
I
he
wanna
was a
say-
scumbag,
I
you
agree.
probably would have
Yeah, I
heard
wanna
Bill
say
Gates
that
say that guy
I'm
was
not
a
disagreeing
scumbag.
on that, but I'm just saying I was always impressed with Bill Gates for
Yeah.
never saying.
No, and
It's
I
an
agree with
important-
you, but I think that's different
Yeah, I think
from
the
having
important
just a
point there-
bad person.
Let me just say the important point. Yes, bad person. You absolutely need to make sure that you're not going to get in partnership with them. Person that may not add as much value as you during the thing, you're going to also live with them a long time, and it's going to potentially be another existential moment where you have to have the strength to take your ego away from that and say, maybe Bill Gates never would have had Microsoft if Paul Allen wasn't with him. So
Yeah.
there's a butterfly effect thing there too, right? That, if nobody can ever know the answer to that, but I wonder if there was no Paul Allen, if there would be a Bill Gates, And so you have to respect that as well, that it's not all.
But the other thing that I would say is, like when we did the Fortress partnership, we were like, all right, all for one, like we threw all in. And with hindsight, because we ran different businesses, it would have been more logical to say half the profits you make in your own business you keep and half you put in the shared pool. We didn't. And I'm still friends with my partners. It was not always, in any partnership, there's tensions, there's joy, but I picked great guys. But you really do need to think through partnerships before you sign them. Like, okay, if after 3 years you want to go run for mayor, what does that mean to Dave and I after 3 years? So, like, what's the exit strategy if someone wants to leave? What's the vesting? Is there a capacity every couple of years where we get together and it's a 2 to 3 vote or to shift ownership interests? There's all kinds of things you can build into the agreements. It's not always. It doesn't always need to be, this is forevermore.
Yeah. You know what was interesting, like to talk about Fortress though, to get into this conversation, you pick good partners.
I know Fortress.
That's the bottom line.
Good partners that you're still great friends with today.
And obviously, Pete and Wes are both friends of ours.
Wasn't there a fourth partner?
There are 5 actually.
Yeah, there were 5.
What happened to the other 2?
Well, Randy Nardone continues to be a partner with us in Caldera House, and him and Wes. He was always Wes's like Robin, Batman and Robin.
They're still together doing business?
And then Rob Kaufman, who
cool.
owns a NASCAR business, and he left a little earlier.
But you guys picked great partners. Like that was a bunch of people that were like all added value, right? To some degree. And when things weren't going perfectly and had to have hard decisions made, they showed up and made hard decisions, and the business kept going. So
I think one of the things that I also learned too is that pick partners that, for me, I don't know about anyone else, pick partners. If you're going to put somebody on a same playing field with you as a partner or equal partner, whatever the case is, pick a partner that you truly believe has the same morals as
shared
you,
values.
shared values as you, and has just as much to lose as you.
Yeah.
I think the second you start picking partners that this is their entire, like, let's say, come up, and you're already kind of up there with a lot of different things, and that person, it just might not work out the way you want it to. Anyway, Trey.
We started with the inauguration, new president, new America, new year. We ended with partnerships. I was getting the wrap it up business untitled. I think that was a good first episode.
What do you think? Let me just ask this. What do you think? Let's go to like in the next year, not the whole presidency, but like what's a trend or two related to business that we might see? And Mel, think about this too, and then I'm going to answer it as well, relative to this new Trump presidency.
Listen, we're going to see a lot less regulations. So, depending on what business, some regulations would have taken 4 years, they might take 1. And so look within your own company or your own industry to say, hey, what's going to change and where can I take advantage of it?
Boom.
What do you think?
I think this was a great episode, and I miss you guys.
What do you think about Trump's first year, though? What do you think? Any impressions?
You know what? I love that Trump, for better or for worse, I love that he's, in my lifetime, the first president that I'm seeing do everything he said he was going to do starting day one. Whether you say it's for good, whether you say it's for bad, I'm watching him execute on his promises. And I don't think there's been a president in my time that I've seen, at least so swiftly, or, even to be fair, over the course of their entire run, do the things they promised their voters to do. So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah.
Again, some may say some is for bad, some is for worse, but you know what you voted for. So the people that voted for him, he's executing on his promises, and I do like that.
Yeah. I think he is potentially going to overplay his very strong hand, right?
Yeah.
Some of the pieces where he is too emotional, at times too vindictive, right? I do think that some of these big things he's doing, we talked about immigration before, DEI, housing stuff, yes, regulations will be cut. And I think some of these things will come back to really reasonable policies where makes a statement, like let's say with immigration, but then it becomes a much more measured approach. I hope, right? I think his history has shown that he still spends a lot of money basically when he's in the presidency. I don't really see that changing this time around. I think there's a lot of like honeymoon hope right now because we're 1 week into this, and it's easy to say, listen, I respect what he's doing. I think the Democrats had completely lost the plot. We talked about all that. But I think it's easy to say right now, kept all the promises, things are going in this direction. I think the proof's going to be in the pudding. And to Mike's point about the pendulum, it really needs to not go too far, to swing too far up here. I think some of his libertarian, what I call like libertarian instincts of like less control by big government, less regulation. I think that's the most important defining piece of what people were really, kind of tired of in a sense. And that even rolled through to things like COVID being a political issue. If you kind of boil that down, it was like this like control, of where you could be and what you had to do by the Democrats. And the Republican or the Trump side of it was kind of like a little bit more like, no, so nobody should be telling you what to do.
Even in California right now, I don't know if you saw the play, Mayor Bass has not allowed people to go back
to their homes,
in Palisades and start cleaning up the mess because she's saying, you know what, we got to make sure that all this asbestos, we're not going to kill all these people, then they're going to sue the city later on because we let them go back early and they got the same thing that happened in 9/11, right? There's a $1 zillion fund to pay out people that lived in Tribeca because 9/11 cleanup was full of asbestos and we didn't know about it. And so she's doing the same thing and Trump's like, it's their home, let them go back, just make them sign a waiver.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of a fundamental issue on how you think about your job to protect people and where that goes. And I don't know where I come down exactly on it. It's probably not, let them sign a waiver and then they can do anything they want if you really think they're going to kill themselves, versus let's not be so, let's not risk manage to the 99th percentile. People want to get back. They want to clean up. They've lost everything. And so I don't know what the right balance is because I'm not there. There always is a right balance.
Yeah. And I think part of the right balance is a little bit more personal responsibility by individuals,
yes,
right?
100%.
And that's what I think is coming through some of this as well with the less regulation. And anyway, I'm optimistic it's going to be there's going to be a honeymoon period, and then we'll see what happens later in the year, whether, we are really fiscally responsible or it's more talk than not. And
I mean, they're at the big, the budget reconciliation needs to get passed sometime by April. That'll be the first test of the president in Congress.
Yeah. And I think housing's a big issue, bigger than it's ever been. If you look at new houses, people are stuck in their existing mortgages because they have 4% mortgages and mortgage rates are now at 6.5%. So there's very little existing home inventory on the market. New homes are largely too expensive because mortgage rates went up, and so nobody can afford them. So it's this weird condition where we're screaming about a housing crisis, but yet home builders aren't doing well. There's nothing for sale. Interest rates are high, and there's got to be a solution to that because it's probably it's up there with the biggest kind of political issues, I would say, right now, is the non-affordability of
There's millions of homes in China that we could live in for free.
90 million.
90
million empty homes
crazy.
in China.
We'll
All right,
bring that
people.
up next episode.
Business Entitled, peace out.
Like, subscribe. Just talk to us. We'll talk back. And want to end by saying, fuck that guy again.
Love, not hate.